In the 1970s, an example of a Reading T1 class steam locomotive, known as 2101, would get a second chance at life when she was pulled from a scrapyard and restored to pull the American Freedom Train in the eastern part of the United States. After this was completed, she pulled several more excursions along the Chessie System, but sadly, her second chance would be tragically cut short just a few years into it, when a fire saw to it that she would never run again. When Reading 2101 was first built, she wasn't Reading 2101. Well, she was still Reading, but not 2101. She was numbered 2037, and she was a member of the Class I-10SAs, which were 280 Consolidations, built all the way back in 1925. And these Consolidations served faithfully for many, many years. However, by the 1940s, it was becoming quite clear to the railroad that the I-10SAs just weren't cutting it anymore. So they decided to put them through a rebuilding program. They took 30 of them and converted them from 280s to 484 northern types. And one of these was 2037, renumbered to 2101. As strange as it might seem to turn a 280 into a 484, the conversion was actually a remarkable success. The T1s were great, exactly what the railroad needed at the time. In 2101's case, she pulled many freight and passenger trains between 1945, when she was rebuilt, to 1956. During that time, she had a pretty decent service record, with the exception of one pretty major accident that happened in July of 1948. It was a really bad derailment, although according to sources, the exact location of the incident isn't even known, nor is it known how the crew fared. What is known as 2101 was fixed, and she continued her service life without any other horrific accidents. By 1956, however, Reading was in the middle of dieselizing, and nearly every single steam locomotive they had was sent to the scrapyard, except for 5 of the T1s, which included 2101. She and her sisters were cared for in Reading's roundhouse from 1959 to 1964, and used for the Iron Horse Rambles, which was an excursion train that ran until 1964. 2101 was kept on standby for this. On October 17th of 64, the 50th and the last Ramble excursion took place. Rising operational costs, as well as a deteriorating trackage, forced the end to these fan trips, and as a result, 2101, along with one of her sisters, 2100, was sold in September of 1967 to Striegel Equipment and Supply of Baltimore, Maryland, to be cut up for scrap. However, Striegel did not wind up scrapping 2101, or her sister for that matter. They instead kept them both in storage for 8 years. The reason for this is disputed among sources, though it seems to be down to the fact that in the 1970s, the value of scrap metal just wasn't very high, at least in America, so it may not have been economical for them to bother tearing up these locomotives, preferring to keep them around until, well, either the value of scrap went up, or perhaps someone would want to rescue them. 2101 would stay there until 1975, when the United States of America was gearing up for their bicentennial, and the second American Freedom Train, which I mentioned when I talked about 4449, was indeed in the planning stages. The train would stop in dozens of cities, and was meant to be pulled by steam locomotives as a way of drawing attention. 4449 is probably the most famous locomotive that was used for the American Freedom Train, and even though she did have the majority of the stops, she didn't pull it nationwide. In Texas, they used Texas and Pacific 610, and in the eastern part of the United States, they used 2101. Ross Rowland, who's had a hand in a lot of heritage steam operations, was a big part of figuring out which engines they were going to use. They discovered that 2101 was actually still in pretty good condition. The scrapyard had actually protected her pretty well. and she was rescued and restored to operating condition on March 28, 1975. The process to get her back up to steam took only 30 days, which just blows my mind. Straggle must have really protected her if she was already in that good a shape that it only took that long, especially in the 70s when steam was long out of use. Funnily enough, they actually brought her back up to steam in the same exact building where she'd been rebuilt into her present form nearly 30 years prior. She was painted as American Freedom Train number 1, which, hey, I have the majority of the stuff. Why am I not number 1? Because you get the fancy colors. Get out of here! As I said, 2101 handled the eastern section of the trip before handing the train over to 4449 in Chicago for the western section. Then, when the train was headed back east, 2101 took it at Birmingham, Alabama, and pulled it through most of New England, then handed it back again to 4449 at the Pentagon. Within 2 years after the American Freedom Train was all done, 2101 was repainted into bright yellow and orange colors. Hey, I can look pretty too! And she pulled many different excursions that were arranged again by Ross Rowland on the Chessie System as the Chessie Steam Special. It was meant to celebrate the 150th birthday of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. And for a time, these excursions were a big success. People enjoyed them. And 2101 was always an impressive sight, a fan favorite in the East. But as I said when I started this video, it wouldn't last very long. In March of 1979, 2101 was sitting inside the Stevens Yard Roundhouse in Silver Grove, Kentucky, patiently awaiting the next time she'd be steamed up for another excursion. But unbeknownst to her or anyone else, some faulty electrical wiring sparked and ignited the roundhouse while 2101 was trapped inside. The flames burned to such intensity that the roundhouse was almost completely destroyed, and 2101 suffered significant damage. Most of it was cosmetic, but there were many concerns about her mechanical soundness, and it was believed that she would require a complete overhaul in order to be considered safe to operate again. Chessie did not want to absorb the cost of doing this, and as a result, 2101 was forced into a second retirement, never to run again. The only bright spot of the situation was that 2101 was not sent for scrap. Chessie instead opted to trade her to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum in exchange for Chesapeake and Ohio 614. 614 would be used to haul the 1981 Chessie Safety Express from Baltimore to Hagerstown and back again, leaving 2101 to sit on static display. But the museum did at least take the time to give her a cosmetic restoration. They restored her to her American Freedom Train form. Additionally, when her sister, 2100, was restored, 2101's tender was actually traded. 2101 to date still remains on static display at the museum, which isn't the saddest end in the world for a steam engine. I mean, she is safe, but it's just upsetting to see her excursion career be cut short, when it seems like at least two of her sisters are gonna get much longer lives when it comes to that. As I said, 2100 was actually also restored, and she's currently in the process of being restored for a second time as I speak. 2102 also survived, and she just made her excursion debut on May 28th, 2022. There's also 2124, who didn't actually have an excursion career. She's currently sitting on static display at Steamtown National Historic Site in Scranton, Pennsylvania. For the foreseeable future, it does seem that 2101 will remain on static display just like 2124, only getting a taste of an excursion career before it was tragically ripped away from her. At some point, I suppose it's not impossible for someone to give 2101 another chance at operation, but at least as of the making of this particular video, it doesn't seem like that's ever gonna happen. And with that, a special thank you to all my underwater train finders, Some Dude 267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, Panzer Kitchen 131-232, Josh Johnson, Metal for Life Guy, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Tommy Rossini, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Joshua Long, Brian, Jack Carson's Rural Videos, Hayden DeGrow, Master of None, Lord Arthur 444, That Guy with the Beard, Mark Holding, Murder Drone Stall, A Person 723, DM Tribal Typhoon, Alfonso Lapuche, Royal Hudson 2860, Icer for 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matthew Wolf, Ohio Trucker 1, Mr. Sleepy Matt Weaver, Alaric Jaspers, Tom Redlion, NS Productions 8104, Hannah Bird, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, Dr. Racer 78, The Baxter, and Caleb Crosswhite. Till next time, this is Darkness, Individual of Fun, farewell.